Hello and welcome to Movie Menu Classics, your go-to podcast for classic cinema. We're your hosts. I'm Heather.
I'm Vasthi.
And each episode will be a spoiler-free discussion of our favorite classic movies. We'll be sharing why we recommend these films, and we're going to be sharing some fun facts while we revisit the classics we love. Today, we're going to be talking about two Halloween specials, as we're going to call them. We're going to be discussing Nosferatu and Psycho. Nosferatu, I can't talk today. Nosferatu.
You're fine.
Nosferatu's up first. It's a 1922 silent German impressionist film, and it's touted to be the first vampire film, even though I believe that's not actually true. So we'll talk more about that. So from 1922, it was released in Germany on March 4th, and then in 1929 in the US. It's not rated. You can catch this. It's actually free on Amazon, Tubi, Vudu, iTunes. It's on YouTube, so you can pretty much find it anywhere. It is
for free.
Yeah, it's free. It's public domain because it is such a classic, and it's also actually it's almost 100 years old at this point. It was directed by F.W. Murnau. I'm also going to horribly butcher all of these names because they're all German, so I'm going to try my best. Let's see. It was my notes
Screenplay by...
Thank you.
Screenplay by Henrik Galen and based on Bram Stoker's Dracula. But before we dive into the film, I just want to share a few historical tidbits of what was going on in 1922. So to start off, the formation of the USSR, which actually stands for the Union of Soviet Socialist Republic, which I actually forgot, I forgot what it stood for. Everyone just knows what the USSR was. The Civil War in Ireland begins between the Irish nationalists and the Irish Republicans. The British Broadcasting Company is formed, the BBC. The tomb of Tutankhamun is discovered, and the Lincoln Memorial is dedicated in Washington, D.C. And also, a small film, Nosferatu, A Symphony of Horror, premieres in Berlin, which I feel silly for admitting this, but I had absolutely no idea that this was a vampire film. I'm not a film school student. I'm just a film enthusiast. I've seen it countless times on several top horror film lists. I've seen some of the famous imagery of the shadows and the creeping, but I think I just assumed this was like a devil film. I don't know. Within the first 30 seconds, you find out that it's roughly based on Bram Stoker's Dracula, which I've read and I really enjoy, but I felt really silly for not knowing that. It's in every description. I just never bothered to read one or seek it out. When did you watch it first?
I caught this once, maybe 10 or 15 years ago. It was just like a late night. It was on Turner Classic Movies, and like I don't even think I'd really heard of it before. It was just, it was like, oh, this is a horror classic. You should check it out. And I was like, okay. So it's kind of like a middle of the night discovery. And then come to find out it is such a critical piece of horror film history.
Yeah.
So that was really cool. It's definitely kind of like Metropolis in the sense that you really should watch it. There's some pivotal silent movies that are really important to movie history and cinema and how we've gone from there to here where we are in terms of cinema. So this is a pivotal piece, especially in the horror genre. And like you, I'm not that into horror. I love it. I love Halloween, but it just, I don't know. I'm really inexperienced with horror movies, to be perfectly honest. My friends always kind of are shocked at the number of horror movies, modern horror movies I haven't seen. Like, the list is really long.
Same.
Movies that I need to catch up on.
And any horror film I've watched, I've either been tricked into or I got peer pressured into it. It's never like my idea to like, hey, let's go watch.
Let's watch a scary
whatever.
movie.
Yeah. No,
Yeah.
I'm not into them. But
So
I'll give credit where it's due. And you just mentioned Metropolis, and I just found it really interesting that these films really came out very close in time, and how influential German cinema has been in film history. I just find that really fascinating.
Yeah, I had no idea, honestly, that I didn't really know that this was a German film necessarily when I saw it originally.
Right.
And I haven't seen it since that first time. I shockingly had never even really, Metropolis wasn't on my radar at all, which shocks me now that I've seen it.
Right.
And I certainly didn't know. It's fascinating, like you said, that it is German Impressionism, and it's cool that movies have been kind of a worldwide accomplishment. And yeah, it's touted to be centered in like Hollywood and LA, and like that's been the forefront of movie making, but really at the beginning it was kind of everywhere, which is really cool that it played such influence on the industry.
And in a very short period of time, really, when you think about like some of those really rough cut films that you can find on YouTube that were made in like, I don't know, 1910 to, just a few years later, you have these feature films. I wish I would have taken a film class when I was in college. And I know there's a common stigma around film students, but I don't care. I would love to just, what's it called when you just show up without credit? Just audit. I would love to audit.
Oh yeah.
I would love to audit like a bunch of film classes at some point. Maybe I will. But in the meantime, I love just talking about these as we are right now. So the plot: vampire Count Orlok expresses interest in a new residence and real estate agent. Is it Hutter's wife?
I think it's Hutter.
Yeah. I guess that's a fair description of the film. I mean, I'm glad I didn't know anything about this. And we tried to find a trailer and there really wasn't one, which is understandable because there's a few misconceptions about the film. Yes, it premiered in 1922, but it didn't officially make its way into the US until 1929. And for that specific reason is because of copyright issues and lawsuits and things I didn't really think about would happen back then. Now it makes sense, but I'm like, oh, wow.
I know we hear about copyright infringement and think of it as such a modern concept, but really this film does have a lot of controversy in that sense. Just real quick before we move on, it's starring Max Schreck, Gustav von Wangheim, and Greta Schroeder. And Max Schreck is a fascinating figure in movies because he was an original like method actor, and he was famous for his work on the stage for playing like strange character odd spectacles on stage in stage horror as much as there was. So that's why he was chosen, but he was a method actor, like a stage method actor.
I can only imagine what his method acting for this must have been like, just super creepy. I mean, I was creeped out. I watched it in the middle of the daytime, and the imagery.
He was so creepy that there's actually like an urban legend around this film that he was in fact a vampire. And so much so that they actually made a film about it.
Oh, what's that called?
Let me find that. No, okay, so in 2000, they made Shadow of a Vampire, and it's a fictionalized depiction of the events surrounding the making of the film.
I want to watch that. Shadow of a Vampire?
Yeah, okay. It's Shrek is played by Willem Dafoe.
Oh,
which is really cool.
Yeah.
But it's based on the urban legend that he was actually a vampire. So it's I haven't seen it. I wanted to.
I'm actually down to see it. Yeah, especially now that I have a new appreciation for
right?
the film.
Yeah, I read about it and I was like, oh, this is really cool. So there was so much of an urban legend, and still to this day, I mean, they made this in 2000, so
Yeah.
it's almost 80 years after the fact. Super cool.
Uh,
And then going back to what you were saying about the controversy surrounding the film. So, like Vasthi said, the book is based on 1897 Bram Stoker's Dracula. He's an Irish author. Now, I guess from what I've read, that Murnau, the director, tried to get the rights for the film, but for whatever the rights to the book so that they could make the film.
mm-hmm.
But for whatever reason, that kind of fell through. But they kind of pressed on anyway, so they tried to change like the names
Just
and
enough to be able to...
change enough plot points to like, oh, we're not actually stealing this thing, but it wasn't really enough.
Right.
So Bram Stoker's widow went to court and in 1925 she won, and under the terms of the settlement for copyright infringement, she wanted all of the copies of this film destroyed. So in Germany, all of the copies were destroyed. But luckily, as Vasthi said, that it had gone to other countries like the U.S., so there was a surviving print in the U.S. where actually Dracula was in public domain at the time. So there wasn't the lawsuit and the copyright infringement laws didn't work here in the U.S., so all the copies weren't destroyed. But luckily, there was a copy that was able to be... like all the prints of the movie now are copies from that copy, apparently, according to urban legend about around this film, everything that I could find about it. And so I think that's really fascinating, but I know that they struggled to find the like original subtitles, and it was all like the American translation, the English translations of everything.
And also I was a little I wasn't bothered by the soundtrack, but then upon discovering that of course, the original soundtrack probably got lost. So there's several soundtracks to this film. Just because everything's so sloppy around how it survived and with the court cases and everything, I feel like this is an incomplete film maybe in a similar way that Metropolis was incomplete until very recent when they uncovered the lost, the missing pieces of the film. I wouldn't be surprised at all if there are still fragments of, the original music or missing scenes or.
Yeah, I'm not 100% sure which version I watched because I don't know how many versions or how many soundtrack versions there are. I tried to find the most authentic version I could on Amazon Prime.
I think we watched the same one. Yeah.
But the soundtrack was honestly awful. I have to say, we've come a long way in scoring films, but it was just so repetitive and intense the whole time. It was like the same thing over and over and over again. And I had to like turn it down at some point.
Really?
It got to be too much.
Okay.
It just was like, it was my least favorite part. I think maybe there's like a reworked version, like the same original footage, but maybe with a better soundtrack might be more interesting. There was the same level of intensity for every moment. And as we know from modern films, the soundtrack makes such a huge difference. Like when we're going to talk about Psycho, the soundtrack was so pivotal to that, and we'll come back to it when we get to that film. But it's amazing what sound effects can do. Actually, I had a friend when I was in junior high, and we went to go see a scary movie together, and when it was going to get intense, you know how people cover their eyes?
Yeah.
She would cover her ears.
I've done that.
And like hum.
When it gets a little too... It's me preparing... For me, it's when it's preparing for the inevitable like jump scare.
Yeah.
I have absolutely done the same thing where I'm kind of like...
Like, I don't want to know. But yeah, the buildup of the music is what builds up the intensity more than just the visual. So it is interesting what sound can do and how important scores are to films. But this one, it was definitely on the annoying side, personally.
All right, yeah.
That's my least favorite part of this movie, honestly.
Is the soundtrack.
Yeah.
So something that I probably would have lost money on countries that banned this film and countries that like completely embraced it. So I read that Sweden banned it for excessive horror, and that ban wasn't lifted until the 70s, 1972 to be exact, which I've always thought of like Scandinavia as completely open and um not I would have never guessed that Sweden was the European country that banned this. And to further lose my money, the Vatican selected the film for its art category among its 45 greatest films, which okay.
Interesting. That's surprising because
It's shocking.
it is like a horror film, and there's I mean, a vampire is like this undead creature that brings death, and
Well, maybe they were like me. I thought it was a devil movie, and
but that would make the Vatican hate it even more.
um, so going back to the copies, wanting to trying to get the copies all destroyed. So I came upon a really interesting tidbit about that this actually wasn't the first film adaptation of a vampire movie. In 1921, a film called Dracula's Death was released, and it was also like a loose interpretation, and there are no copies that have survived. And there would be no proof of this film if it wasn't for some like title card or lobby cards having been found. Had those never been found, it would have been as forgotten as Bram Stoker's widow wanted it to be forgotten. So there really isn't much proof, but there is proof that it did exist, and it's just gone forever, which is a bit of a shame. I'm sure it wasn't very good, but
I'm wondering if she had that movie destroyed also.
maybe, yeah. If anybody knows, please let us know. That would be really fascinating to know. I do like that this was the beginning of the classic vampire film trope of because I it's been a while since I've read Bram Stoker's Dracula. I also didn't realize how late that film or that excuse me that book came out. So when I read that tidbit about Bram Stoker's widow suing, I'm like, wait, how old is she? Yeah, the book was written in 1897, so that would only be 20 years after. So like, okay, that makes sense that the timeline the timeline fits. I don't know. I think I just assumed that it was early 19th century, which is that's on me, but I think about that book, I don't think turn of the century, if that makes sense.
Now, how close? I've never read the book, so
Uh-huh.
how close is this film adaptation to the book, as far as you remember? I know you said it's been a while
It's
since you
been a
read
very
it.
long time. I'm actually surprised. I have to reread the book, but according to my memory, I would have figured that the name changes and everything enough to was enough of a story change or like to create a technicality. The whole idea of someone traveling to where he's at to discover if all this is true, that I believe is identical or very similar. And again, if anybody who is an expert in the book or that's your favorite book ever, please let us know if how close of an interpretation it is, and would a copyright infringement hold up today? You know what I mean?
Yeah. As far as I could tell from what I read, because I was trying to figure out what was different, what had
Mm-hmm.
been changed. So obviously,
Names.
in the book, yeah, he's Dracula. So in this film, he's called Count Orlok.
Mm-hmm.
And then in the book, as far as I understand, he's trying to move to London. And
I believe that's similar. One
okay, and
thing,
well, in this case, he's in the movie, the film, he's trying to move to a town in Germany, which I forget the name of the town. I don't think I wrote it down. Starts with a W, I remember that, but he's trying to move to this town
oh,
in
Vismar.
Yes, thank you.
Yeah.
He's trying to move there, so that's different. And they changed the names around things, and then I know the ending was changed, which was actually an invention for the film, but has influenced society's perception of vampires and the rules. I feel like there's with monsters of all sorts, like vampires, werewolves, zombies. There's like a rule book on how they work and how to deal with them and how to kill them. And this actually helped write the playbook on how to deal with vampires, which is really fascinating.
That's still followed to this day.
Yeah, so I guess we'll just jump to that moment. This is a spoiler, but we decided that we feel like this is such a vital part of vampire history that it's worth the spoiler. So this film is the first place this ever showed up, but they show us how sunlight can kill a vampire,
which is not the case in the book.
I'm not sure what it is. I just know do you know what happens in the book? How vampires are killed in the book? Do you remember?
Garlic has, I believe garlic has a huge role in, and some other thing, now that we're confessing spoilers, blood transfusions is like a huge plot point in the book.
Interesting.
People are bit left and right, and you kind of have to get the blood out of your system to keep from turning. And that
so in the book he's trying to turn, because in the film he doesn't, the Count Orlok's not trying to make anybody a vampire, right. He's just trying to eat, basically. So in the book he is trying to make new vampires, like if you're bitten.
There's oh god, now I'm really gonna because I remember enjoying it. I remember when it came to the blood transfusions, thinking like, oh, okay, they hadn't figured out blood types yet, but it was still very interesting to read through the different perspectives. So each chapter is like somebody else's perspective. So I have to, if anyone can correct me on that, please share. But from my memory of the plot lines in the book, I felt it was different enough from the book, and I they credit it in the film when the first few seconds it says based on Bram Stoker's. So I guess
I wonder if that's the newer title cards or like the American versions, though.
That's true. That's very true. Yeah, so it's just, I'm overall, but we haven't really talked about like the actual film, just like the controversy around it. I'm just fascinated that there were copyright infringement laws in the very beginning of filmmaking, essentially, and how influential this film is to this day. And I'm really happy to see that it's still on many top horror lists, because there's the whole new generation, multiple generations that have never seen it and will eventually see it. And sometimes you can appreciate an older film with how like, oh, okay, that's kind of cheesy, or oh, it would be made so much differently now, where some of this imagery is so freaky. The makeup in Count Orlok's face, like, is so fascinating. I'm still creeped. But I'm also what you would call a horror weenie. I don't like it. I'm easily scared, but it scared me, and I'm happy that it survived the test of time, even with so much against it.
This film is great at setting up, like you said, the classic horror tropes of vampires, and just there's a lot of yes, it's black and white, but there's a lot of shadow play, and it's just there's a lot of suspense. Like, I know Orlok or Dracula is not on film very much. I think you know exactly how long. I think you said in your notes, but he's not actually, you don't see him much. There's a lot of suspense build up around him, and there's you see shadows of him, and
He's
they
never
did
blinking. I actually thought for a second, like, is that like prosthetic eyes or like what makeup is involved, or he just had his eyes completely peeled and
yeah, he's
it,
creepy, these long fingernails, and just this thin, um ghostly or dead corpse looking body, and just his movement is very stiff, and it really is like the class. This is where we get that classic film, like, precursor to like Bela Lugosi playing
yes.
Dracula kind of thing.
So
And
I actually,
it's oh, go ahead.
I'm sorry, I actually have a small note that might, I mean, obviously we don't have the transcripts of the court cases here, but I think something that is important to note is, so Bram Stoker never went to Romania. He never visited Transylvania, the Alps, or so everything he just described in the book is just from people that had traveled there. So he never saw it for himself. So um one very important detail is that he refers to Nosferatu. He mistakenly thought that meant vampire in Romanian. So when you title your film Nosferatu, this made up word, or actually I don't know if it's made up, but like the actual word for vampire in Romanian is vampir. It's just vampire without the E. So it's like a huge gap between the
Fascinating.
I would find between the filmmakers, like if you're gonna name it after inaccuracy that the author made. That might have been like a huge factor in why his widow was able to
Okay,
win
so
the court case.
Stoker created the term Nosferatu.
He referred to it, yeah, thinking that it meant vampire, and it's not the Romanian word for vampire at all.
And then Murnau, the director of the film, stole that name. Interesting.
Um,
Oops. I'm stealing your stuff and it's wrong. Excellent.
yeah. So actually, so if people, if you're Romanian, if you've been to Romania, if was it ever the term at one point and it just got lost, or was it a mistake? That's what I think is still kind of up in the air. I don't think it's ever been proven that that's a real word. Um, but yeah, but that's what I came across. That
Well,
it
it's
was
a real word
mistaken.
now.
It's a mistake. It was mistakenly referred to as a vampire in Romania. So similarly, so let's get into like the filming of this. So what I found fascinating with the shadow play is that a lot of it looked like a stage play to me. And so F.W. Murnau, the director, I read that some of his influences were Nietzsche, Shakespeare, and Ibsen plays, which would make sense to me in terms of it looking like a play, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and I believe there have been stage productions of this, which I think could be executed really well. I've never seen it. I'd be very open to watching a stage version of this film, if it happens at all or often. Um, but one small tragic thing about Murnau is he died in 1931 in a car accident. So he was just in his early 40s. He was really just getting started with his film career. So I think that's a shame, because you watch this and something that, yeah, you're right. It's almost 100 years old. We're getting to that milestone in film where the really influential films are starting to turn 100 and we're still talking about them.
Again with the filming, something else that found interesting is because it's basically impossible to film at night in 1922. So all of the nighttime films are actually filmed in broad daylight. So originally, to get away from that, they tried to tint the like nighttime scenes blue. So that was supposed to differentiate the scenes that took place during the night and the day. Now the version I watched did not have this tinting. So there were points where I was really confused as to whether it was daytime or nighttime, but I wasn't sure if, and I remember thinking when I was watching it, does sunlight affect them? I don't know, because I had that rule baked in, right? Because I've been trained my entire life that sunlight kills vampires.
Yeah, you don't even have to be a fan of the genre. Yeah. You just kind of, it's something you pick up. That's just
common knowledge, right? That's how you kill a vampire, right? Just like a stake through the heart for a werewolf, right? So I'm watching and I'm like, okay, so is this pre that idea, which was interesting. And I couldn't tell what was day and what was night at all.
Right.
Because the nighttime scenes were so brightly lit, like it was obvious it was daytime. So that was it's interesting. I don't know if the tinting would have helped or how effective that was. I'm going to be interested. I want to watch a tinted version to see if that makes a difference.
Oh,
But yeah, that was really interesting because I was confused as I'm like, okay, is this daytime? Is this nighttime? And you kind of had to get an idea based on what was happening in the scene. So for instance, there's like once he gets to Transylvania or to go see Count Orlok, he gets to the town, like kind of below the castle.
Yeah.
The people are really concerned about, and like this place is creepy, and they're talking about don't go out at night, and you see a werewolf.
Don't go. Yeah, the townspeople. So actually, I just want to quickly interrupt about another trope that's introduced here is everybody warning you and ignoring every warning. Like everybody was saying, don't do it, don't go. And he's like, oh, I'm gonna go. Thanks for the warning, but I'm gonna do it. And you're basically screaming at the, like I found myself kind of yelling at the TV, like, what are you doing? What? Don't go.
Oh, did you know that the werewolf was actually a striped hyena?
No, I didn't know
that. I was so proud of myself. I was like, that looks like, because first of all, it took me a minute to figure out, okay, that they want us to think that's a werewolf.
Right.
But also I was like, that looks an awful lot like a hyena. And then I actually paused the movie to look it up right then because I really wanted to know. Right. And I was literally like, yes, I got it right. I was like, I guess it was a hyena.
I love moments like that. So actually, it's important to mention that the story takes place in 1938. So it takes place like well into the future. So it's not like a futuristic film, but it's not filmed in that time. It was also not filmed in the Transylvanian Transylvanian Alps or anywhere in Romania. It was filmed in the German cities of Lübeck and Wismar. And some of the exteriors are still intact. So if you're a super fan of the films, and I like to go to film locations all the time. So that's really cool to know that the sets there are still intact. The Transylvania part of the shots were actually filmed in northern Slovakia, and none of those exteriors have survived. So only in the German cities of Lübeck and Wismar are still there. I'm not sure why it wasn't filmed in Romania, but I just know that it's not actually on location.
I wouldn't be surprised if it was honestly just cost prohibitive at
Probably.
the time. Like it's a German film, they're filming it in Germany. It's just a lot
closer
cheaper to stay local with, you have German actors. You'd have to move a whole production. I'm sure that was a lot more challenging and expensive.
Closer. It's a lot closer than Romania would have been. Some of the effects, so the levitation, which freaks me out. And I would love to see a stage play of it. Some of the effects are just achieved by just simple hard work, stop motion photography. So such as like the levitation of the lid and the opening of the ship's hatch, those like really creepy. Um,
Yeah, if you haven't seen the film, there's a couple different points in the film where stuff kind of moves on its own, as if the vampire can like make it move with his mind. So he actually kind of like puts himself in his own coffin, and it is really fascinating how like how do they get that to work. So like she said, stop motion. It's pretty cool. It's a basic concept, but it was very effective.
so very quick, I just want to revisit our small discussion on like the meaning of the word Nosferatu. So it sounds like it was a made up word. It um something I came across is the Greek word nosphoros is translates to plague bearer, and that was kind of heard around Romania around that time, and it just kind of like spread like wildfire. But it doesn't look like Nosferatu is an actual word.
Hmm.
So if
Now,
that's the case, that would be a huge that's huge. That's a huge clue in terms of like the copyright infringement. They might have gotten away with the changes had it not been for that word, that made
so
up word.
it's interesting that you brought up plague bear. Now, I don't know if you remember, but in the book, is there a plague also?
I don't remember. It would
Okay,
make
so
sense if there was, because I think cholera was still adamant during that time. I'm definitely gonna reread the book.
yeah, I definitely
Um,
want to read the book too.
it's fascinating. I just recommended it to my husband's cousin, who I think I'm gonna read it right along with her because it's been a good decade since I've read it and I enjoyed it. I bought it. I've been recommending it. It's just one of those I didn't keep rereading for no particular reason. I really enjoyed it, and the more we talk about this film, and I want to reread that and then rewatch this to really see the if the controversy would still hold up, and maybe even like dig deeper on would the laws still apply in Germany today, or
Yeah.
some food for thought.
And so I have a question for you. Speaking of controversy and plague, this
Hmm.
all actually ties really well into something I wanted to ask you. Now, I was reading about controversies with the film, and if you're looking it up, there's talk about the theme of this film
Hmm.
being anti-Semitic, actually. So I'm wondering what you think. Do you think it's actually anti-Semitic, or do you think people are just reading into it? So in the book, Dracula is I got this quote. He's described as a tall old man, clean shaven, save for a long white mustache, and clad in black from head to foot, without a single speck of color about him anywhere, with pointed ears, sharp teeth, hook nose. So it's kind of similar to what they did in the film. He just has like these long fingernails,
Hmm.
but he does have like the pointed ears, the hook nose, and he's, you can tell even in black and white that he is corpse like, that he's
Yeah.
devoid of color, like he's doesn't have any pigment to him. But what they're saying is um with Count Orlok,
Hmm.
the vampire in the film, with his hook nose and his claw-like fingernails and his large bald head, that it's stereotypical of caricatures of Jewish people from the time. And also his features have been compared to like being rat-like or mouse-like, which is often like Jewish stereotypes of the time, like their
I
looks being similar. So and then also so he kind of looks like the caricature of maybe like a creepy Jewish person, right? And then his interest in acquiring property in Germany um is also analyzed as preying on the fears and anxieties of the German public at the time. Writer Tony Magistral wrote that the film's depiction of a, quote, invasion of the German homeland by an outside force poses disquieting parallels to the anti-Semitic atmosphere festering in Northern Europe in 1922. So when he arrives by ship, he also brings with him, in the film, he brings with him a swarm of rats, which, according to this, is a
hmm
deviation from the source novel. So he's spreading the plague throughout the town. And, according to this theory of anti Semitism, this plot element further associates like Orlok with rodents and the idea of like a Jew disease causing agent.
That's fascinating that there's that connection has been made. And the only thing I can think of, this film did come out after World War One, and Germany lost the war, and they were looking for scapegoats as to, why are we in the depression that we are. Kids are starving and we need someone to blame, and that's where it started rising. So the timing actually, as soon as you were talking about some of the physical characteristics and like some of the propaganda art that Nazis would use with the hook nose, I mean, it was really disgusting cartoons with, or caricatures with hairy, huge nose, huge ears, so like not really corpse like, but I could see where someone who wants to make the connection can.
That's what I'm wondering. Is it just, I feel like you could watch any piece of film or read any book, and it'd be a kid's story,
Right?
And you can make up, or not make up, but read into like this larger overarching metaphor for something much more sinister.
So it's not anything that really crossed my mind, but at the same time, in 1922, where the Germans are trying to get themselves up from their feet from World War One. If I don't know what the director's politics are, so that would actually be fascinating to.
So I actually read, on that note, I actually read that Murnau was actually open, as much as openly as you were at the time, but he was actually openly gay. So you'd think that he'd be more sensitive to like the persecution of another group.
It sounds like that wasn't intentional, if that's true, because we know that eventually what happened during World War II was that they were part of the persecuted group too. I feel, just off the top of my head, I feel like those propaganda cartoons scapegoating Jews until this is why we're in the depression we are, came after. I have to double check that. If you know, anybody who knows, please let us know. But I feel like that didn't come until after the film came out.
Like a little later, a little closer to World War II.
Maybe in like the early 30s or late 20s. I'm not a German history expert at all, but yes, everything that you said is true. Like the exaggeration of the facial features, being the connection between seeing Jews as vermin that are infesting our happy society. We got to clean it up. That's all true. Those parallels were made. I just think it doesn't sound like that's what this was, but it's a very interesting possibility. It didn't cross my mind.
I 100% agree with your assessment. I don't think that it was intentional. I think that people are reading into it. I think that was their artistic interpretation of the book and making him creepy, like making this vampire creepy. And he was described in the book as having the hook nose and the long ears and stuff. So I think,
speaking of our connection, like, if I don't know where some of the sources came from, but if the re-release was made and was released in 1929, that would kind of match up with the timeline of what I believe these propaganda issues started going out, which is a good 7 years after the original release. You know what I mean? So maybe those who saw it in the late 20s, early 30s saw something that wasn't meant. back in 22. I could be completely wrong, but I'm just kind of brainstorming with you. I think it's a great uh question. I have no idea, and I want to investigate more on that.
Yeah, I'm wondering if that film Shadow of Vampire talks about that at all, like the what's happening at the time.
Hmm.
But I think you're right. If you're watching this, let's say 1930, 1931, and the at the time in society, that's what's on your mind, that you might read more into this film than it was intended for. Because
Hmm.
to me, if like me and my friends are gonna make this creepy horror movie, like we're probably just focusing on the horror of it all, and we're not trying to implant a political statement.
Right.
So I'm
Yeah.
gonna go.
So
In my heart, I feel like it was a horror for horror's sake, and not a political talking point.
oh yeah, absolutely. I agree with you. And I'm not saying that I'm not open to learning more about it, if that is in fact true, but my initial impression is that I don't think that's what that was.
Okay, so
Um,
final thoughts on Nosferatu. What do you think?
don't watch the trailer, but definitely see it. If you're like me, you've just heard of this title, you know it's classic. Um, I mean, there's still a few days until Halloween. I'd say go for it. It's really fascinating. I love shadows and German expressionism, and it's sort of like Metropolis. It was easy to watch for me, even with some awkward transitions, like what you were saying about the um not being able to film in at nighttime because of technical issues. But on that, I also want to add that I remember watching this episode of the Brady Bunch where they were in Hawaii and they were all hiking at this volcano, this cursed volcano at night, and it was clearly filmed in the daytime. So it's something that I think many film productions, whether it was TV or film, just adopted for a very, very long time because that wasn't, until the 70s. You're still filming during the daytime to make it look at like at night. Film students know the proper terminology, so I apologize if you know what we're talking about. But I think it was ahead of its time. I think we owe a lot of the cliches, whether you love them or hate them, but they're still implemented now. And, nearly 100 years later, we're still talking about this film. And I think go for it. You don't, even if you're like me who hates horror films, I think this is an important one to see.
I think that pretty much sums it up. It is important to see, and although it's not a very long film actually,
No.
and although there's some, like you said, there's some awkwardness, and I'm not, like I said, I'm not particularly fond of the soundtrack. It is just so interesting to see where these things originated, and it is a suspenseful film. You don't know what's going to happen. um it's really fascinating in that sense. There is, for me, there was some comedic moments almost that were
Uh-huh.
like kind of silly in this, because from a modern perspective, we're looking back, and it was, like silent film can be very over dramatic, and that's just, going with the time and accepting how things were filmed and acted at the time. um but
Oh, yeah.
there were some like silly moments we were laughing at, which kind of broke the tension. But yeah, it's definitely worth a watch for the perspective of where these tropes came from.
The
So
influence of it. Yeah, for sure.
yeah.
I agree.
Okay.
So now
All right.
on
Well,
to
moving on. Yeah, you want to tell us about the next film?
Psycho. So I will say the whole approach of this podcast being spoiler free and trying to convince friends, family, whoever is listening about movies you may not have seen. Psycho is 100% takes the credit of why I believe so strongly in kind of keeping this a little bit spoiler free because I saw it maybe 2 years ago for the first time at an ArcLight theater where they were just showing classic films on the big screen, and I hadn't seen it. My husband took me, and he said one of his favorite theatrical experiences was being with someone who had no idea what the twists and turns of this film was. And it was one of my favorite memories of just like, what? How did I not hear about this? Because you hear about certain movies and you think you know. So like I knew what the Godfather's a mob movie, even though it took me a very long time to also see that one. Like you hear of certain things like um Citizen Kane, you hear Rosebud, but
You don't know what
you
it
don't know what
means.
it means exactly, but like you know certain things about certain films, even if you haven't
Yeah.
seen them. So
And I feel like Psycho, I mean, did you know going in about the shower scene? Because I feel like that is the most classic horror movie scene in existence.
I knew
Is at
about
least the concept of her standing in the shower screaming and like a knife. Like I feel like that's classic movie
yes,
horror
yes,
trope.
I knew about the shower scene. It's also been parodied to death on everything that was
Yes.
influential for me. So like The Simpsons, Animaniacs, kids programming that probably shouldn't have been referencing some of these classic films, but like I that's how I learned about the Goodfellas. That's how I learned about so many and actually, not plugging anything, but Animaniacs just came back with like new episodes, so I'll
I
probably
know, I'm
be
so
checking
excited.
that out. But so anyway, so back to Psycho. I was so happy that there was still something out there that I had no idea. How did I go this far, especially having so many friends that love cinema, that went to film school, that just didn't accidentally spoil this for me. And there's sometimes, if someone gets spoiled, a common defense is, well, that film came out, 50, 60 years ago. It's not my fault that you didn't know. But after watching this, I've been so careful to just always assume no one has seen something whenever I bring up a film if I want to discuss it. So I'll always ask. And going back to my pet peeve of people reacting like, how have you not seen? I just told you I haven't seen it. Let's put the shaming aside. I'm not perfect. I still sometimes react like that to some of my favorite films, but I've become much more aware after my
I
my
have
whole
too.
experience with Psycho. It was just such a joy that something that came out in 1960 was managed to be spoiler free my entire life. And it was a joy, and I'm so happy. And with that, I'll dive into this because Hitchcock obviously had a huge role in that experience, that non-spoiler experience for this film in particular. So before we dive into the nitty-gritty of the film, so 1960, just a few things going on in the world at the time. So President Eisenhower signed the Civil Rights Act of 1960, which primarily dealt with voter disenfranchisement. So there was a couple of civil rights acts. So this was particularly the one of Civil Rights Act of 1960. The Summer Olympics in Rome were the first to be televised. The first televised presidential debate occurred between JFK and Richard Nixon. JFK ended up winning the presidential election. He's also the first Catholic and youngest president to be elected. I have to just make a footnote. He was not the youngest to become president. He was the youngest elected. The youngest to become president was Teddy Roosevelt at age 42. To Kill a Mockingbird was published. The American Heart Association started linking smoking to heart disease and death in middle-aged men. And Psycho premieres in New York City. So some topic we didn't talk about the last time because in 1922 there were no Academy Awards. So Shockingly, I don't think this won anything. So best director, got nominated for best director, but it lost to Billy Wilder for The Apartment. Best supporting actress actually went to Elizabeth Taylor, not Janet Leigh. The best cinematography for black and white went to Sons and Lovers, and the best art direction for interior design went to The Apartment. So it was nominated for those four, did not win any. And it is apparently the current oldest movie to have an R rating. The budget was only 800, roughly $807,000. So he wanted to shoot this for under $1 million, which even for back then, that was already starting to be unheard of. But it made.
Well, I feel nobody really had any confidence in this film, right? Like he just really wanted to make it.
He really wanted to make it, and I'm really happy that it was made in black and white because I don't think it would have had the same punch in color just because it's still a little archaic for some of the special effects. I think it would have looked very cartoony. I think I would have been distracted by a lot of the details, costumes, and props and the car colors. I think so. We've discussed when black and white movies are filmed for budget reasons. Like, okay, you could either choose to shoot on location in Rome or film in color and it has to be on set. This was 100% intentional. This was to be filmed in black and white, and I think it was the right decision. I mean, I know it sounds stupid to say like Hitchcock knew what he was doing.
Shockingly, he had it right.
So anyway, so I watched.
Where'd you watch this?
I was just about to say.
Oh, okay. Read my mind.
I watched it on the Peacock network. I signed up for a free trial, and I just, my husband set a reminder when to cancel it for a free trial, but that's where I watched it. But where did you watch it?
I rented it on Amazon,
Okay.
Which I know you can also rent it on Vudu, iTunes, YouTube, Google Play. It's all, I believe, like $3.99. But then also, where did I just? I guess maybe it was the Peacock Network because we also just got that, like the free trial or whatever, and I was like, oh, I could have just watched it here. But we did it like a couple days after I watched it, so c'est la vie.
Yeah. So it was released in September 8th of 1960, directed by Alfred Hitchcock, screenplay by Joseph Stefano, and is based on the novel Psycho by Robert Bloch. So here's the plot. A Phoenix secretary embezzles $40,000 from her employer's client, goes on the run, checks into a remote motel run by a young man under the domination of his mother. I watched the film without knowing any of that. So I feel it's not really not a spoiler, but I mean, if you know anybody so if you're someone like my husband who is a super fan of this film, knows all the trivia, and I know there's a lot of super fans that might be a little on extra alert about our facts. Please know that it is coming from love. It is coming from admiration, and feel free to correct us on anything we may have gotten wrong. So I would say if you want to take anybody who is in my position that just doesn't know anything about this film, I'd say don't show them the trailer. Don't tell them what it's about. Just say just give me an hour and a half or however long this film is and just enjoy it. Just watch it. Yeah, because I didn't know any of this when I went in, and it was just blown away. I'd say avoid all trailers until after you watch the film, because I did like the trailer with Alfred Hitchcock, but with YouTube and there being so many different types of trailers, I think it's very easy to get spoiled by this film with what's out there.
Yeah, and it's such a beloved film that when we were trying to find a trailer to watch this, there's so many things that people have made as like an homage to the film. But it's just, it shows way too much. It's not like, if you haven't seen the film and you don't want to be spoiled, I would agree and not recommend not watching any trailers. And Alfred Hitchcock was adamant about no spoilers, which I want to dive into afterwards. I guess we'll finish up with who was in this film, Vasthi?
Anthony Perkins, Vera Miles, John Gavin, Janet Leigh, and Martin Balsam. Which, by the way, I just want to say how much I love Anthony Perkins in this. I absolutely would have. Everything that went down in the film, I think, is because of him. Like, I had no idea who he was, number one. I know there's been several sequels that he's in. I haven't watched them. I don't know if I should. If you're a super fan, please let us know. Like, are you going to come in and say, like, oh my God, don't watch it the way Godfather fans say about Godfather 3? Or is it something we should check out? I kind of want to preserve my feelings for this film as is, and I haven't wanted to watch the sequels.
Yeah, there's also like a TV show on Netflix, Bates Motel.
Oh, I've heard that's decent though.
So, well, yeah, so I have my roommate, she's never seen Psycho, but she's watched Bates Motel.
Oh, that's interesting.
And she really loved the show. Yeah. And I was asking her, because I didn't want to give away anything about the film, but I was asking her the basic plot line of that, and it seems from what I could get from her without prying too hard by giving away things, but I wanted to see if it spoiled the film, and I don't think it does.
Oh,
so I think you can kind of watch them independently, and it doesn't give away the huge spoilers for the film Psycho. So, but she thought it was great. I've heard other rave reviews about Bates Motel, so it's definitely on my watch list.
Okay, yeah, it'll be on my watch list too. So I was talking to another super fan of this film. And so talking about how Hitchcock was adamant about not wanting people to spoil this film, creating this strict no in, as if the film has started, nobody is allowed in. So I wasn't aware that there really wasn't that concept of movie times back then. So like when I started going to the movies, I didn't grow up going to the theater until I was like 10. And it's only because a small dollar theater opened near the park where I was taking swim lessons. And so because it was $1, it was just movies that had been out for a couple of months. So we'd always get all the films a little bit late. We'd just kind of show up and then stay until the next part of and so like if I walked in the middle of Aladdin, my mom and I would just stay until where we caught up on the next showing. So it was just kind of like open seating. There was no hard attendance rules the way you see in plays. I mean, I guess you could technically still do that now if you sneak into a theater or into a film, but so like ArcLight Theater is still really strict with, not selling you a ticket if the showtime has started. So anyway, it never occurred to me that that's how theater going was at a certain time. Just you show up, you stay and catch up and leave.
Well, yeah, apparently, actually, Hitchcock's concept of no late admission was controversial at the time. It was one of the first films to do that. I guess I'm going to mispronounce it. Diabolique was in France.
Yeah.
Was like the first film to really have that strict rule about no late seating.
Side note, I highly recommend Le Diabolique. It goes actually pretty hand in hand with Psycho.
Okay.
It's excellent. Don't let the fact that that's a French film dissuade you. The subtitles,
from what I understand, it came out just a little bit before Psycho, right? Like it's pretty around the same time period.
That would be excellent. It sounds like it was.
I'll have to check it out. But I'd never heard of that film until doing research for Psycho.
It's a fantastic film. Definitely watch it. These two films basically did for the bathroom what Jaws did for the ocean.
Oh.
Like it's so freaky. It's awesome. But not for like, if someone like me can handle it, like you could handle it.
So Hitchcock, and I'm actually not even going to say why. Mm-hmm. He was just very adamant that if you didn't see it from the beginning,
you have to wait.
It just, you had to watch it. And at first, theater owners were really opposed to this idea. Like, they thought they were going to lose business. They just were not happy with this concept. But after, like, the first day, the owners were enjoying long, long lines of people. So they were fine with it. And then actually, every theater that showed this movie had apparently a cardboard cutout installed in the lobby of Sir Alfred Hitchcock. And he's pointing at his wristwatch. And he has a note saying, quote, "The manager of this theater has been instructed at the risk of his life not to admit to the theater any persons after the picture starts. Any superious attempts to enter by side doors, fire escapes, or ventilating shafts will be met by force. The entire objective of this extraordinary policy, of course, is to help you enjoy Psycho more." Than Alfred Hitchcock.
I have another cardboard cutout that has something similar, but the exact words is, "We won't allow you to cheat yourself. You must see Psycho from beginning to end to enjoy it fully. Therefore, do not expect to be admitted into the theater after the start of each performance of the picture. We say no one, and we mean no one. Not the manager's brother, not the President of the United States, or the Queen of England. God bless her. Alfred Hitchcock."
Oh, I love it. So I guess maybe there were different slogans. That's really cool.
Yeah, so yeah, going back to the way I went to the theater, it never occurred to me until doing research for this film that there was a point in time where movie times weren't really a thing. You just kind of showed up when you had time and you caught what you can. Where now we're so conditioned to, I don't want to miss trailers, or we have to get there at a certain time. Like, just staying for the next showing isn't an option anymore, really. So I love.
Yeah, I grew up very conditioned to I guess because I grew up around theater,
mm-hmm.
but you only watch things from beginning to end,
mm-hmm.
and the only time that was ever ruined for me happened to be The Sixth Sense.
No.
Yeah, so this is totally a tangent about something else, but we used to look at movie times in the newspaper when I was a kid because, it was pre-internet or whatever. So, and besides calling the theater, that's the only way to find out the show times. So we wanted to go see The Sixth Sense, and we get to the theater and we purchase a ticket, let's say for the 4:00 showing.
Right.
And we get the ticket and we go into the theater and the movie already started. And we're like, oh, that's weird. We didn't realize where in the movie it was, though.
Mm-hmm.
But it was like 40 minutes before the end. So the end happens and we're like, okay.
Oh, no.
It wasn't significant because we'd only watched 30 or 40 minutes of this film. And we went out to the lobby and we're like, what the heck? And it turns out the movie had started, like the showtime was off by like an hour or something. And my dad was so mad. He's like, why would you sell us the ticket to this film and not tell us, hey, by the way, it started like an hour ago.
Right.
You really want to go?
That's
so
valid.
They let us in. So then we had to go. We had to saw the beginning. And then, when we caught up to where we were, I'm like, oh, that sucks.
That
I know.
Sucks. I feel like that Sixth Sense was probably one of like the last of those like iconic moments of like, we didn't see that coming. Like I'm blanking.
Have you seen 50 First Dates?
Yes.
Okay. You know how if you've never seen 50 First Dates, Drew Barrymore's character, her memory resets every day.
She's basically Dory.
She got into an accident, and so like every day since the accident her memory resets. So like every day she thinks it's her dad's birthday. So they kind of like redo it, and she's like, oh, I got you The Sixth Sense for your birthday, and they're like, okay, we're gonna watch it again.
That's funny.
And then at the end, her mind is so blown. She's like, oh my god, I can't believe, like, I don't want to spoil it if you haven't seen it, but they're all just like, yeah. It's very much like Psycho, where the end is very like shocking.
Yeah. Oh
You
my
didn't
God, to
know.
be a fly on the wall during that like first during those first few screenings when like
Ooh,
people
yeah.
were starting to get used to okay, like and
And
it was
this
good marketing. It built
and
hype. It makes
yeah,
people
and
like, whoa.
Psycho is still to this day. Like I saw it 10, 15 years ago and it rewatching this, I didn't remember most of the movie. Like I didn't remember even like the plot you read
Right,
that
right.
a secretary embezzles $40,000. For some reason I didn't even remember. I just remembered like the famous shower scene and then like kind of the basic end, but
Right.
not how any of the plot worked around it. So it was kind of like watching it for the first time.
Yeah.
And I was I remember thinking before watching this when you were suggested Psycho, I was kind of like, ugh, that film's overrated. That's what I said in my
Yeah,
head.
yeah, yeah.
When you suggested, I'm like, okay, fine. It's overrated, but it's a classic. We'll watch
So
it.
fine.
No, it's not. I was super into it and like it was suspenseful and I can imagine at the time how terrifying this film actually was. My mom said she saw it in theaters and she could not shower when she was home alone for a long time.
Well, because you think about it, and it's something that Janet Leigh in interviews has said, like, you don't realize how vulnerable you are when you're bathing.
Yeah. You're
Like,
just in there alone, naked and by yourself.
um, yeah, so also when I admitted just a few minutes ago that when I saw this for the first time just a few years ago, I'm a Hitchcock fan. I own North by Northwest, Vertigo, Rear Window. I love Spellbound, which is really hard to find with Gregory Peck and Ingrid Bergman. But like I was a Hitchcock fan. It was just The Birds and Psycho were just his two most famous ones that I just never got around to. I was never boycotting them. I don't know what I was waiting for. It was just one of those things, like as we've discussed so many times on this podcast, that we just never made the time for it. I never made the time for it. Um, so I mean, it happens. Even if you're a fan of the genre, just sometimes you just don't get around to it. And you're right. Rewatching this, there were still a few certain things that I had forgotten. Like, oh, that person becomes a victim. That person becomes a victim. I forgot about that. It's just very exciting to see. And I keep emphasizing that I'm so happy it's in black and white. He said it was because he thought it'd be too gory. Where now I think modern times film fans, it just the special effects probably wouldn't have had the same oomph to them.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Definitely.
and there's a master play on thinking you've seen something that didn't actually occur. You know what I mean? Like
Mm-hmm.
we never see, we never see flesh being cut.
Right. That's something I appreciate about or older horror films. Or
Mm-hmm.
you don't need the blood and gore. Or like Perry Mason. Like I grew up
Yeah.
on classic Perry Mason. There's never blood. There's never. It's everything's implied. You don't. It's not necessary for me. Like I'm not even fond of like modern films in the sense that it's just so bloody and
Oh, I
gory for that
hate
shock
gore.
factor.
Yeah.
It's not. For me, it's superfluous. It's like unnecessary. It's just like, oh, how edgy can we be? Not, it's not necessary. You
Right.
get the idea. I mean, you get the shower scene. I'm assuming everyone knows about. Okay, someone is killed in the shower. Sorry, spoiler. uh, but you don't see it like you said. You don't see it happen, but you hear sounds and you see reaction from the person and it's there's a suspense there that's built up that anything else is completely unnecessary. And I think you're right. Black and white, like Alfred Hitchcock was a master of storytelling in this format, this style. He had this niche and this talent for suspense that this is the classic Hitchcock example of this
Yeah, and he's
genre.
done so many color films, so I do trust that it wasn't a budget thing. He made the decision to make this in black and
Mm-hmm.
white. So Heather, tell us about like the whole drama between like the novel and just the beginning of.
Oh, well, so Hitchcock really wanted to make this film, and people weren't really into it. So the budget was really small for this film. But Hitchcock actually, so he bought the rights to the novel anonymously from Robert Bloch for only $9,000. And then they went and bought as many copies of the novel as they could to keep the ending secret. So preemptively he was trying to make this spoiler free, which I think is really fascinating. Like that is the
Mm-hmm.
long game right there. So he went out specifically and tried to obtain as many copies so people didn't know what this film was about. And then also again with the budget constraints, like I have the numbers here specifically. He wasn't paid very much. Hold on one
So I
second.
know about Anthony Perkins. He was paid $40,000, which I don't know if it was a coincidence that that's also the exact amount that the that was embezzled in the film.
And
Like,
Anthony Perkins is who's
um,
Anthony Perkins?
the the young man at the Bates Motel.
Oh, right.
Janet Leigh took a pay cut in order just to work with Hitchcock. So like, yeah, money was not being thrown around. Like it didn't matter that Hitchcock was already established. It was there was a lot of complications with it. Like even it was released by Paramount, but it was produced by Shamley and it was filmed at Universal. So like that sounds like a whole lot of lawsuit risks right there, or how studios get reading about studios loaning certain actors and whatnot. Like that all just sounds really messy. Um,
Yeah.
but then again, I'm not in the industry, so I don't know how common that is. But reading that, I'm like, all right, let me get this straight. Okay, who released it? Who produced it? And where was it filmed? Um,
Yeah. Okay, Hitchcock really wanted to make this movie. He actually deferred his salary. So he had a standard salary of
mhm.
$250,000. Um so in lieu of that, he just asked for 60% of the movie's gross. And then Paramount was like they didn't think the movie was going to do well,
Mhm.
so they agreed to that, which his personal earnings from the movie exceeded $15 million. And if you adjust for inflation, that's like over $120 million for like 2016. So I think he, even though he originally deferred his salary, he definitely got the
The
better end of that
gamble paid
deal.
off.
And then, as you said, Anthony Perkins' salary was $40,000, which is, like you said, the amount of money, right? So in 1960, the $40,000 equivalent is approximately $347,000 in today's money.
And you know what? So that I say well deserved. I think he was the best part of this film. This could have easily have had a different effect if it was. So
Yeah.
apparently the I haven't read the book, but apparently the physical description of him in the book, he's basically the opposite. He's like this awkward, heavy set, sweaty, bald guy. Where Anthony Perkins is, he's very charming, very trusting.
Yeah, he has this innocence about
Mm-hmm.
him.
And I think I mean that was my initial takeaway the first time I saw it, and then rewatching it is just like he is this film. Even though we all
Yeah.
know the classic shower scene, like no, he carries this film, and I adore every frame he's in. Um, and I mean, maybe we should have had a special spoiler podcast because there's so much I want to talk about.
I know,
Um,
right? There's a lot with this film. I have a couple myths for you around this
oh
film.
yes,
So popular myths emerged that in the shower scene that ice cold water was used to make Lee's scream realistic, But on numerous occasions, numerous interviews, she's denied that. And she said, you know, the crew was actually very accommodating, using hot water. That scene actually took a week to shoot, which I know we're going to go more into specifics on that. Another myth was that graphic, and this is crazy to me that this was actually a myth that's popular. But that graphic designer Saul Bass directed the shower scene.
Oh, but yeah, I've read that too.
This has been refuted by several figures associated with the film.
Like he storyboarded it, right? Like that's all he did. Like he made the storyboard, but he didn't direct it.
But like Janet Leigh was like, absolutely not. Yeah. Like she said, quote, absolutely not. I've emphatically said this in any interview I've ever given. I've said it to his face and in front of other people. Oh, that Leigh wasn't even. There was also a myth that a body double was used for a lot of the filming of that. But she's like, no, I was there. Hitchcock was there. We're there for the whole week. We're together. There's no way that someone else directed it or that there was a body double. So it's apparently all a myth. And then Hilton A. Green, the assistant director, also refutes the claim that Bass directed it. He said, there is not a shot in that movie that I didn't roll the camera on, and I can tell you that he was there. And then also Roger Ebert, a longtime admirer of Hitchcock, says, and this is very rings true for me, it seems unlikely that a perfectionist with an ego like Hitchcock would let someone else direct such a scene. And that really sums it up.
Yeah,
like, there's no way someone else directed it. And he wouldn't have, I doubt he would have let someone else stand in for her either.
So, right now that you just mentioned that about the myth of the body doubles, that's actually, according to, there's a documentary on Hitchcock. It's kind of old. It's called The Making of Psycho, and it's on the Peacock app. If you want to watch it, it's really fascinating. So this was my first time watching it. So she's interviewed about that shower scene, and she says there was one there to kind of test out what could be shot. What was translucent? Like how translucent was the water? How much did the water block in terms of like
or the shower curtain?
For the shower curtain. So they hired a professional nude model who was comfortable enough to kind of stand in for those shots. And for her shots, when they were ready to bring the actress in, to bring in Janet Leigh, costuming and her, they kind of came up with not a prosthetic, but like a second skin, because anything that they were trying to hide her nudity wasn't working. So like no strapless this or whatever. So they came up with like sort of like an adhesive.
It was
like
the original pasties, right?
Yeah. So it's kind of like a combination of both. So they did hire a professional nude model to test out how translucent, how much could be shown between the water and the curtain shots before bringing in Janet Leigh. So I thought that was really fascinating too. And just also, like, I could only imagine the shock of people insisting that they saw nudity when they when they in fact didn't. It just, the cuts. So let's talk about the shower scene. So you said it took 7 days to shoot. It's a 3-minute shower scene. There's 77 camera angles and 50 cuts. And in that documentary, they talk about the 50 cuts feeling like each cut was a stab. So it plays around with the movement, and I kind of lost my thought in the middle of that, but so let's talk about the rest of the shower scene and the music, because I think we talk about the importance of music in film and how this almost didn't have a soundtrack. The scene almost didn't have that. So
do tell. I haven't heard this.
So the composer Bernard Herrmann insisted that a soundtrack be used. So the soundtrack was all strings, which I don't believe at that time had ever really been done. It'd either be full orchestra or whatever. So, and I forgive me, super fans of the film. I'm sure I'm gonna miss a few details in telling this, but so so Hitchcock did not want music in this. He composed this segment of music, and then as soon as they were put together, like, all right, absolutely do it. And I believe he got a pay raise from this.
Yeah, that's fascinating that Hitchcock originally didn't want the sound because the score is the the leading factor in the suspense. And actually, so he doubled Herman's salary. Apparently, Hitchcock was so impressed with the sound, and then this is such a Hitchcocky quote, but he said 33% of the effect of Psycho was due to the music, which I would 100% agree.
Yes.
That is what builds the suspense,
And
and it's
fun
so
fact,
influential during the film to how you're feeling about the moment to moment.
and fun fact, I know that John Williams was influenced by this film when making the score for Jaws, because they both have that same, like, just a very simple piece of music warning you of danger, and you feel it in your bones, like, oh my god, something's about to happen here. And
Yeah,
I
it's
think,
amazing how far music had come. Scoring a movie had come in just 40 years, right?
mhm.
So Nosferatu's the 20s. We didn't get it in America till the 30s. So 30 years later, we're going from the soundtrack of Nosferatu, which is just it's just music that kind of fits the like scary genre almost.
Mhm.
It's not influencing how you're feeling. It's not taking you on a journey. But in this film, the
The
score
danger.
is taking you on a journey. It's letting you know how you're supposed to feel. It's building up the suspense to the next moment. So it's fascinating how far we came, and they're really like 30 years later.
I
That's fascinating.
so every, my closest friends know how much of a super fan of Bambi I am. So Psycho, Jaws, and Bambi for me are the three films that I associate danger with simple music, which is, I don't know how influenced these composers were by the man theme in Bambi. It's very similar with like
Hmm.
the danger when he's in the meadow. It's like a dun dun, and it's just, it builds up tension every time there's danger. And that came out in,
Mm-hmm.
42. So I think there's enough time spaced in between these three films that I would be very surprised if they weren't directly influenced from each other. There's like a 20-year
Hmm.
gap between each film, which I think is pretty interesting.
It
And
makes a lot of sense.
uh-huh,
Yeah. It's and then I mean composers always have I mean any artist has influence of other things that they've watched, right? So you are earlier in your career you're watching something it inspires you, it's going to influence the work that you're making. So
right.
that really makes a lot of sense. And when you learn how moving music can be
And it could trigger,
and
yeah,
using it
it manipulates,
effectively.
yeah, it manipulates your feelings as a film goer of what you're supposed
Instead
to
of
be feeling between
yeah,
transitions.
instead of sound just being there, you can use it as a storytelling element,
Where,
which is
yeah,
why sound design is so important. And we don't really realize how important it is. But if you take this, if you mute a scary movie, and I've done this just out of theory, like I was home alone trying to watch a scary movie once, and I was having trouble getting through it. So I actually muted it after my friend had said like, "Oh, it's the music that makes you scary," when she covered her ears.
right.
And I tried it. I'm home alone trying to watch a scary movie, and I was like, "Oh, it's not scary at all because there's no suspense. The jump scare isn't a scare because you weren't anticipating it.
You weren't told to, yeah, to kind of
Yeah,
guard
to be
yourself.
nervous."
I agree with
Exactly.
that.
So,
And actually, a friend of mine started just experimenting with scary movies and sound. So same thing, just for fun. Put on a scary movie, but then on his phone, or I forgot, another source of sound, started playing like the old timey Western music. and it made it funny and very watchable for a wimp like me. So that's
funny.
To link your point directly. Music is everything, especially in thrilling and intense thrill moments and suspense and horror films. Music is everything. And or even like something like Gone with the Wind, where there was at a time there was just kind of like that soft music playing in between dialogue, and I found it distracting. Or yeah, it doesn't
they're not
manipulate.
using it it's not using it effectively. It's just like ambiance, basically.
Right. That's exactly right. So is there any so I think I keep saying I'm not in the industry. I don't know the terms because part of me is still kind of a little uneasy about having certain perspectives because I maybe I don't feel qualified enough. But I'm speaking as a film lover, a film goer. So I want to talk about some of the camera angles that I love in the shower scene. I don't know the proper terms, but one of my favorite scenes was just for the technical part of it is the camera being placed underneath the shower and just
like in your background,
yes,
which I realized that is not like a glowing halo of loveliness behind you, that it is actually a shower head with water.
It's a shower head.
It took me a while to figure that out.
Something as simple as there are no droplets falling on the camera lens. Like, how did they do that? And in the making of Psycho, they do get into the technical parts of it, but just something as simple as that. It makes me.
Do you remember what they said? Because I think I had that.
Oh, please share.
Okay, so Alfred Hitchcock had a 6-foot diameter shower head made. So it's a giant shower head.
So it plays with perspective. That's awesome.
Yes. And then they blocked up the center jet so that the water sprayed in like a cone past the camera lenses without any water spraying directly at it. So
thank you for sharing that.
No problem. I thought it was really fascinating too but it's cool because you don't realize that it's 6 feet long. Like the picture behind you just seems like a normal shower head.
Yeah.
But it's cool how like that's the movie magic of playing with perspective and
that made me like that scene even more.
That's super cool.
I love it.
There's a lot of controversy other than just like show times and not spoiling associated with the film.
And nudity.
Yeah, nudity, the sexual aspects of this were a big deal. Like, for instance, it's unprecedented in its depiction of sexuality and violence even. But the opening scene, the very first scene, Janet Leigh and whatever his face is, I don't remember which actor it is, but her lover, so the characters Sam and Marion are shown sharing the same bed, and she's in her
underwear
bra and slip. Which is, you don't even see married couples sharing a bed on screen in television movies.
They're
Lucy
matching
and Ricky
pajamas.
had twin beds. Yeah, so not only were they on the same bed, lovers, unmarried, in a hotel room, but she's in her underwear. Also, I don't know if you noticed in that scene, she's wearing white undergarments, right? And then after she steals the money,
black.
We see her later, she's wearing black undergarments. She also has a light handbag in the beginning and a dark handbag. It's just Alfred Hitchcock was playing with that. She's kind of been like tainted by her crime.
Her sin, giving into her sins and also just the fact that she was trying to wash away her sins.
Yeah,
because that's what makes that part of the story kind of tragic. Is like in case it's a spoiler.
Well, yeah, we don't want to go into spoilers, but it makes a lot of sense. Like she is. It's hard to talk about without spoiling it, but it's like she had made a decision and
no one's gonna know what that decision is.
Very true.
It's sad. Oh, so actually, we're started talking about the opening scene. So going back to some of the technical parts of the film, how ahead of his time he was, and just it just wasn't gonna work out just because the technology hadn't been invented yet. So
Mm-hmm.
originally, when it's panning from side to side, getting a clear view of the skyline, he wanted that shot on a helicopter for the title shot, and they just
Oh.
couldn't figure it out. Like it was too shaky. It wasn't gonna work out the way he wanted. Where nowadays, yeah, you could do that no problem. But that was his original intent, and so he just had to settle for just side to side. um, so he just opted for the wide pan across the skyline. And just a little fun fact, he hated shooting on location, so he absolutely hated that car lot, that used car lot scene. It's probably
Interesting.
we talked about how he's a perfectionist. It's just probably having to deal with elements that are out of his control, where you can
And
control a closed set. You can control everything about,
so
being in a
did
studio.
they built the, I don't know if you know, but
Mm-hmm.
did they build the motel and the house on a lot? Like this is on,
At Universal. I
is it? I feel like it is. Like
Yeah,
it's part of, I feel like I've seen somewhere that it was part of like the Universal tour, which I've never
it's
done,
still
but
it's still there. And yeah, I believe that was built for it.
okay. Yeah, I can't imagine they found something so specific with like a creepy house with like as he said, there's like a 6 minute long trailer that we watched for
Yeah.
this movie Psycho, and it's like this mild mannered innocent looking little motel, and then you pan up and behind it is this sinister looking house. I can't imagine that actually exists anywhere. So it
I
was,
think I read that it was based on like the Central Valley of California. So like that Tulare area of Visalia, like
that makes
that's what it
that
was
makes sense.
that's what it was inspired by. So yeah, you're right. It's not a real place anywhere, but it's inspired by the types of motels you find in the middle of California. Like if you're driving from LA to San Francisco and you just need to stop somewhere, that's what you would see in the middle of the state. So where it's not, they don't mention California. It's supposed to be New York, right? I believe.
No, this is Arizona.
You're
Or no,
right.
it is California. She's coming from, this is like Bakersfieldy. It is Central California.
I don't know why I said New York. That was, I think maybe I had Rear Window still on my mind because I was mentioning and rattling off all the titles. You're right.
Yeah, she's coming from Arizona and she's trying to get to somewhere on like the central part of California. I can't remember the name of the town.
So yeah, it
I'm
matches
not even.
up with with what they were trying to draw their inspiration from, which I think they nailed it. I've driven through that boring section of the state on
It
the
is the most
five.
boring. Yeah.
Um,
So the other super controversial thing about the on-screen moments, besides the sexuality, is apparently this is the first film, like television or movie depiction of someone flushing a toilet on screen.
which is fascinating that it was a thing because you don't think
Yeah,
about, that you couldn't
right.
even see it. Like any bathroom shot couldn't have a toilet. So it's like,
Yeah, that's such a funny thing in modern concepts. But and it's not like there was waste in the toilet that she flushed.
no, she's
But
flushing down instead of throwing something in the trash, she flushes something down the toilet. And yeah, that act of flushing and showing the actual flush and everything going. I mean, it's comical to us now, but
at the time,
at
it
the
was
time,
scandalous. Apparently,
yeah, and you're
also okay. So again, with all this scandal, so and there's like censors. I mean, I feel like this doesn't exist anymore. Like no one's censoring anything. They just slap a rating onto it and like show it on
it's
channels or
not what it used to
streaming.
be at all. Yeah, that's
Yeah,
for
no,
sure.
people were very specific. But so according to a 1990 book, um, it's Alfred Hitchcock in The Making of Psycho. I read this online, but according to this book, the censors in charge of enforcing the production code were wrestling with Hitchcock because some of them insisted that they could see one of Janet Leigh's breasts in the film in the shower scene. And now Hitchcock apparently held onto the print for several days and he didn't touch it.
Mm-hmm.
And he resubmitted it for approval. He didn't change it, but he resubmitted it for approval. And each of the censors reversed their positions. Like those who had previously seen the breasts, now they didn't. And those who hadn't, now they did. And then they passed the film after the director, Hitchcock removed one shot that showed the buttocks of Janet Leigh.
Yes, I actually did. So in that documentary, I told you about the making of Psycho. So that was supposed to be one of the last shots in that shower scene. It was a pan, or I keep saying pan out, just like a zoom out of like a bird's eye view of the crime scene with
and
the
you
pair
can
of
see her butt.
Yeah, and
okay.
I believe it was just storyboarded. I don't know if it was actually shot, but that was talked about of it. That
according to this, he actually removed it.
Okay, so it was shot.
Yeah, like they passed the film because he removed that, and that was her stand-in, Janet Leigh stand-in, apparently. But they removed it so that they were like, okay, fine, we'll give it to you. And then also they were really upset by the opening, like the lovers in bed.
Mm-hmm.
So Hitchcock said that if they let him keep the shower scene, he would reshoot the opening with them on the set. So like, you come to the set, we'll reshoot it.
Okay.
None of the board members showed up. So for the reshoot, so he just left it as it was. Okay. So he got away with it too. And then I think I'm trying to see if I had any more controversy. No, that was the controversies I wrote down. But it's just fascinating how he is kind of almost like diabolical, and it's like, oh, okay, I like how he kind of worked the system and playing with people's minds, like, yeah. Like, oh yeah, I'll change it, and then he doesn't change it, and they feel like because you told me you changed it, I'm seeing something different, proves that you're just.
Well, yeah, I mean, look at how many people thought they saw boobs, and you don't. Yeah. It completely manipulates you into filling in the gaps that weren't actually there. So
he pushed the boundaries. I appreciate that about Alfred Hitchcock.
So, going off on his perfectionism, something that I have to admit, I laughed. I do feel for the crew that got stuck with this gaffe that they had to. I mean, thankfully Hitchcock realized a mistake before having to reshoot the whole thing. But so when they were filming the rain scene outside the Bates Motel, like when she drives up,
mm-hmm.
So they spend all this time trying to set the mood, get the hoses or whatever to emulate rain, the lighting, everything, everyone's in set, and Hitchcock's like, you forgot an important detail, and the guy in charge is like, I did everything I was supposed to. What? So in the middle of this rainstorm, there's a big old full moon next to the Bates Motel, or next to the house. So like, how is there going to be a full moon if it's like in the middle of a rainstorm? So he's like, oh my God, I have to. So the crew managed to like physically block out the full moon during the storm, this quote unquote storm. So I don't know how they blocked it, but they physically had to kind of block out the moon so that they could sell this scene of the rainstorm, which I think is real. Yeah. I mean, nowadays it probably wouldn't. What do the kids say? Just fix it in post.
Right.
But at the time, you had to. Yeah, it was not a thing.
Oh, you know how Alfred Hitchcock is famous for his cameos in his films, which I completely forgot about when I started watching this. I forgot to look.
Oh!
So I actually looked it up later, and it was when I was reading, it was talking about his cameo, and I was like, oh man, I didn't even catch it. So it's really early in the film. And I guess the reason he did that is because at this point he knew people were going to be looking out for him,
and didn't want
so
to
he wanted to
spoil
kind
the
of get it over with early, so they didn't it didn't take their attention away from the plot.
right.
So it's very early on in the film,
Oh, and
and
actually, speaking of
he's
early on
just
in the
standing
film,
outside, huh?
I said, speaking of early on in the film, I didn't know that Alfred Hitchcock's daughter is the office mate of Janet Leigh while they're talking about, like, when they're both at work. I didn't know that was
Oh,
yeah.
I had no idea that was his daughter. That's really cool. Yeah, and actually that's that office is where he's standing outside of. If you're looking for his cameo, like she's coming in the first time she goes into her office at near the beginning of the film.
Right.
It's like the second scene in the film, really. He's standing outside the office, so it's just a real quick little glimpse of him standing on the sidewalk. You'll see his famous silhouette.
So are we going to talk about, to wrap up the shower scene, are we going to talk about some spoilers? And do we warn people this is spoiler? Because there's some technical things that I think are worth mentioning.
Yeah, should we give ourselves like 2 minutes of spoilers? I'll set a timer.
Okay.
So
if you don't want to
tell everyone, if you fast forward 2 minutes from this point, then you won't hear any spoilers. And then I can throw in the one last controversy I wanted to talk about at the very, very end of the film. But I couldn't mention it because it's a spoiler.
Okay, so tell us when the 2 minutes starts.
Okay, hold on. Stopwatch. Okay. No, I'm actually going to set a timer so it goes off because I'll forget to look and then...
We're 10 minutes in.
Okay, on your mark, get set, go.
All right, so spoiler. So at the end of the shower scene, when she's killed and she's flopped over, pulled the curtain down, everything, there's that scene that kind of zooms out from her dead eyes. And something I didn't think about is autofocus hadn't been invented yet. So the cameraman, whoever's zooming out, has to keep focusing as zooming out, which I don't remember how many takes Janet Leigh said had to be taken. But like, she's not blinking, she's not doing, she's like, it was one of the most excruciating things to film because you can't blink. You're in this awkward position. Her face is next to the toilet, that controversial toilet.
She's like slumped over the tub with her face shoved into the ground, basically.
So again, it's just a new appreciation for how far technology has come. It's just the idea of not having autofocus for such a technical shot like that.
We have 50 seconds.
Oh my god. So contact lenses were supposed to be used to show that her eyes were dilated as they do when you die. But it would have taken her 6 weeks to get used to the fit of the contact lens, so it just got scrapped. And along that line, so ophthalmologist contacted him about like, hey, she's clearly not dead because your eyes are supposed to dilate. So they started using, in his future films, he started using a solution that would take care of that problem. So it was all, he knew it was going to be a problem. And they
use belladonna drops, right, to keep your pupils from
in the future,
from dilating.
So if you have,
we have 3 seconds, 2 seconds, 1 second. 2 minutes goes really fast.
It went so fast. Okay, so I apologize. So when we talk about the ending, set another timer so you could share what you wanted to say.
Well, okay, all right. So if you're welcome back, if you were skipping ahead for spoilers, we're actually going to, okay, I'm going to give myself a minute because this is super fast. Okay, so 1 minute from starting from right now. I'm going to press start. Okay, so one of the controversial things with Psycho, besides like sexual things, is at the end of the film, or it doesn't even matter where I say where it is in the film, if you've seen it or not, but there's some gender bending, cross-dressing. Like Norman Bates is dressed up like a female, and at the very end of the film, they they talk about like with an ignorant cop is like, oh, he's a transvestite because he's cross-dressing, and the psychiatrist explains like, no, like he honestly believes he's someone else, that's why he's dressing up. I still can't fully say like I can't in my heart of hearts say it, but
even like at that point, had transvestite even been said on film?
No, it hadn't.
Yeah.
And so this was a totally new concept, and they're trying, and I appreciate that they kind of corrected that inaccuracy about gender bending or cross-dressing. Okay, time's up. Perfect timing. Okay, welcome back.
Welcome back.
If you're just joining us.
That's it for those like super spoilers. So back to like some of the camera placements of the film. So something that had been used in other Hitchcock films is how cameras placed from above and then emulating falling scenes with kind of double, I don't know if it was like a double plate. It was pre-green screen, so they had to shoot like certain falling scenes with imposing someone that was just kind of on a chair and just kind of flailing, emulating the action of falling, and then merging that with a shot that was from above coming down. I'm sure there are technical terms for all of this. I apologize to anyone in the industry who's listening. But I mean, they kind of look silly now just because we're so conditioned to appreciate good CGI. And I mean, that's a whole other conversation with, when is too much CGI too much. But, the going back to the roots of how to manipulate a backwards falling scene is something that's done again in this. And, with having to place cameras in cages and hanging them on rails, I think you just have to appreciate all the processes that had to be taking place in order for us to move into to catch up with the technology and finally allow directors to see what they haven't, not to let how do I want to say it, like without having to be held back by the technical parts.
It's they're figuring the workarounds for like their artistic vision, even though the technology is not there. That's what I appreciate about so many classic films.
Yes,
especially in the silent era, or you look at like Charlie Chaplin and Buster Keaton movies and all those things, or even like The Invisible Man,
right,
or any of those kind of movies where you're looking at these effects, and sometimes even I marvel at how they accomplished. How did they make that work?
Right.
And, it's like, did they figure out how to use different lenses and just like really basic movie technology before you had any digital help? How did they accomplish this look? And I always find that stuff really fascinating. So those workarounds, those creative workarounds is really cool because you really have this vision of how you want something to happen. And I really appreciate that. So do you have any final thoughts about Psycho as a movie? Or did you have any other
I mean, there's so
facts?
much to talk about. I could see how there's been a million interviews and documentaries on this. I feel we could talk about this for like another hour.
Yeah, there's so much about this film. There's all kinds. I mean, there's books about it. There's documentaries. I mean, this film is one of the most analyzed pieces of filmmaking, and it's amazing how much there is. So we've barely brushed the surface.
And just to bring it back full circle, I mean, it is known as, or considered as, one of the worst Oscar snubs of all time.
I agree with that. I can't believe they didn't win anything. I didn't know that, but I guess it's just a timing thing. And again, the studio didn't really think this film was going to be anything. I don't know.
And when it comes
he knew,
like, when it comes to thriller and superhero, just horror, those genres just tend to get ignored anyway. It's very rare that they're even acknowledged. So I guess for it to even be acknowledged back then is a huge thing. That was the win, but still, knowing how influential this film has been, it will forever be seen as a snub. I mean, so there's a ton we didn't talk about, but overall, if you know someone who's never seen the film, don't tell them anything. Just set a time aside to watch this via Zoom, or if they're in your household, just make some time to watch it together.
Yeah, it's a really good movie. It's just enjoyable to watch. It is suspenseful and fascinating, and it's a great film overall. And you really, even though I'd seen it, it was amazing how, because it's been a while, how fresh this was. And I really enjoyed watching it. I didn't think I was going to. I really was on this is overrated. And
right.
I kind of went into it with
kind of Citizen Kane, like, really, that one?
Yeah. Well, and I'm really not that into Citizen Kane, honestly. Like, Casablanca wins out 100-fold.
For you, yeah.
Yeah. But anyway, but no, Psycho, it's just, again, with this is another landmark in the horror genre, but it's a good movie. It's still, and the suspense holds up. Like, Nosferatu the suspense in some ways doesn't hold up, because, again, for me, there was some comedic things.
It's very archaic. Yeah.
But this still, the filmmaking it's there. It's solid. It's a great experience. So I highly recommend watching this. You're gonna get into it. You're gonna wonder what's gonna happen, and
all the imagery.
Hopefully, it hasn't been spoiled for you.
And all the imagery is intentional. I mean, some of the things we didn't talk about are some of the props, some of the mannerisms that each of the characters have. Everything is intentional. So if you want to, I mean, the super fans already know everything we haven't mentioned. But after you do watch that, or after whoever you introduce this film to has watched it, definitely encourage them to look into the making of. And that documentary, Making of Psycho, is something would make a great companion to this after you've watched the film or rewatched the film. So absolutely not overrated, worth all the hype, and magical if you don't know the spoilers, and magical if you're with someone.
It's really shocking.
Mm-hmm.
I was like, oh shit.
Yeah.
I didn't, and like I said, I kind of knew, I remembered a vague ending.
Yeah.
But how everything worked together, and I was like, oh damn. Even though I'd already seen it, it would have been so long.
Right.
It still kind of got me. So it's go check it out.
Yes.
Nosferatu.
Please.
Psycho. So, next episode, I think we were going to discuss films that were in the feel-good drama section.
With a touch
Which
of
film
sports?
were you recommending?
Oh my God.
Touch of sports? Which is your film?
All-time favorite, Rocky.
Aww. I saw the statue.
Oh, I'm so jealous. I haven't been to Philadelphia. At the art museum.
I was in Philly for 6 months, and I made sure to make a trip to the museum. There was a Picasso exhibit, which was super cool.
Fun.
But the statue, besides having a huge line outside of it and people selling T-shirts,
I can't wait to be part of that line.
It's really big. It's way larger than life. I was shocked. I never pictured it as that large, but anyway.
We'll talk about that next time. But we'll talk about my only experience in Philadelphia so far. But it is on my film going bucket list to go to the art museum and run up the stairs.
It's a beautiful museum.
And so your film recommendation.
And it's really our film recommendation because we both absolutely love this movie. But this is one of my favorites. If it's on, I don't care where it is in the film, I'm going to watch it. I love this movie. It's The Sting.
Yeah.
It's so good. I'm so excited. We're really stoked about this next episode because we could really use some like feel good films.
Feel good, distraction, all of the above. just we want to feel good. So yes, so please make sure to check out our website at moviemenupodcast.com. Follow us on social media at Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and YouTube. Until next time,
Stay classy.